Oh yeah, it's the summer, and it's time for summer reruns. Yeah, you thought reruns were gone, didn't you? And they're back. They are back on the unified CXM experience. I'm your host, Grad Kahn, CXO or Chief Experience Officer at Sprinklr, and I'm gonna do my very first rerun here. I'm very excited about this, actually. So on July 13th, I had a chance to talk to Georgina Wilczek, who, by the way, has one of the greatest accents I have ever run into. Man, fantastic voice. I could just listen to her talk all day long. Anyway, so Georgina and I had a really interesting conversation as part of the CX Network Contact Centers 2021 event. I talk a lot about where contact centers are going, where customer care is going. Of course, talked a lot about Sprinklr and how the unified platform for customer-facing functions is particularly well suited to customer care because we can gather all the feedback that people are generating out there, sort it, turn it into a profile, allow the company to collaborate productively around it, and then engage and solve the problems that people have. And it's not always a problem in customer care. Sometimes it's, I want to amplify someone who's having a joyous experience. Sometimes I want to answer a question that someone may have. And sometimes I'm going to solve an actual problem that may be occurring. So that's what Georgina and I talked about. We had a great discussion, some new deck visuals. So if you've not had a chance to see those yet, you can check that out. We'll provide a link to the actual video event at the end of this podcast so you can check it out. There's an awesome video of a bear chasing a bicyclist, and I won't tell you how it ends, but let's just say the bear looks very satisfied. So, no further ado, here we are, CX Network Contact Centers 2021 rerun.
A warm welcome, Grad. It's brilliant that you're able to join us today. And basically, the title of this session is the Contact Center Revolution. So first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you if you can unpack that a little bit and explain to the audience what we're going to be covering over these next minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Georgina, and it's great to be here. Yeah, so I actually think we're in the midst of a massive revolution in contact centers, and this is not just me saying this. This is what we're hearing from our customers, and at Sprinklr, we work with the world's largest corporations. About half the Fortune 1000 works with us, and 91 of the top 100 brands. So we've got a pretty good sample set. And what they're saying is that two things have happened. One is that customer expectations have changed, and they were already changing, but the last year and a half with the pandemic has forced even a greater acceleration. And now people really want to interact with companies via messaging and asynchronous types of communication. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. The second thing is that a lot of agents are now at home. And so things like VoIP that weren't really possible when we had large concentrated contact centers are now possible. But because agents are at home, the requirement for simplicity in their interface has gone way up. And what we're hearing is people are looking for a single screen, not multiple linked windows. And that from that single screen, they want the agent to be able to do voice, email, and everything else. That's actually got some challenges and some opportunities. The opportunity is that VoIP, which isn't really possible in a multi-agent setting, suddenly becomes possible in an agent at home setting. The challenge is that agents at home need a much less complex IT setup. And so they've got to have a single screen that allows them to communicate across multiple channels. So they've got to be able to have email, voice, WhatsApp, messaging, DMs on Twitter, all that has to be in one single interface and ideally with a single view of the customer already. And so these two forces are causing a massive rethink and revolution in contact centers. And if you think about it, some of the technology in contact centers is pretty old. It's some of the oldest IT in companies exists in these places. So the revolution is that we're going to have to do away with the old green screens and some of the old systems and really rethink the way we're doing everything. So it's a pretty exciting time, but you don't always want to live in interesting times, and this is definitely one of those.
From what you're saying, it's also the fact that people are now increasingly operating from home, which is helping to drive that revolution. So do you think that's something which is going to continue now that people talk about getting back to the new normal?
So I don't know what new normal really looks like, but I know it's not necessarily everyone in the office again. And I do think there's something that companies are saying, it's an interesting opportunity here to downsize. Agents can maybe come in and do some training in the office, but we can actually probably attract people more easily from different places. We don't have to just get people that live in a certain region to work with us. So I actually suspect that particularly in contact centers, this distributed nature of the work is going to continue and accelerate.
So AI can obviously be very useful. And that's great. There's a lot of scaremongering in the background about AI being the robots are taking over, and you can tell the difference between what is AI and what is a real person. Is that something that you're beginning to close the gap on now? What would your advice to contact center professionals be who are maybe looking to integrate more AI into the systems that they're using than they have currently?
Well, I salute our robot overlords. And welcome there, just in case they're listening. I'm just, I think AI is widely misinterpreted, and I actually blame Hollywood for that. In the 1970s, there were a lot of films, like Westworld would be a good example, the original Yul Brynner version, where robots were just coming into existence, right? And people in Hollywood immediately extrapolated the robots to, they're going to replace human beings, and we're not going to be able to tell them apart. Well, in fact, what robots actually did is they started building cars, and they paint cars. And if you look at the way robots are very prevalent in our society right now, it's almost, I've got a robot vacuum cleaner, for gosh sake, and I hope if it's listening, it better be working right now. Okay, but they're not really replacing humans. They've become quite helpful, but we're in no danger of being replaced by robots. Okay, so now it's AI. AI is the next big scare. The fact is, AI is there's nothing in AI that's going to replace a human. It's an aid to humans. So I'll give you a couple quick examples. So when I was at Microsoft, I was Chief Marketing Officer for Microsoft US for many years, and we were one of Sprinklr's early customers. We had quite a challenge in doing keyword searches on all these different modern channels, and we were listening to about 125 million mentions a year. So we had a reasonable volume. And if you think about the type of products that Microsoft has, we would use product names that were pretty common words, like Surface, Windows, Office, and my favorite, of course, Word. Right. It was really hard to be able to separate those. And there's some products that's super easy, like Kleenex, that's easy and stuff like that. But those were really hard. So we turned to Sprinklr and we said, we need to be able to tell the difference between someone who's saying, I need to clean the windows on my office, which we were picking up, and I need to clean Office off my windows. The first one had nothing to do with us. The second one had everything to do with us, and then we would definitely want to talk to that person. And so the Sprinklr was the early AI all sort of started working on that and became incredibly helpful. So this first function of AI is to sort. And the sorting function is extremely helpful. And what we find is as we started pushing AI into our customer experience centers and different places where people were doing a lot of this response, we would be able to double the productivity of community managers almost instantaneously because they were spending so much time just simply sorting through messages. Now, again, that's not replacing anybody. That's actually making people more effective, because I have not yet run into a company where they're saying, I'm easily getting back to everybody who wants to talk to me across every modern channel and on every review site and every forum. Nobody's got 100% coverage. And so you've got to get your team to be able to cover more. The second thing is that AI can be super helpful, and especially with newer agents, in helping agents leverage each other's expertise. And so one of the things that we do is that we look at the answers that are well responded to by customers, and we essentially surface those to everybody in the agent community for that company. So we're using the AI to help the best responses from the best agents be available and visible to all agents, and so all agents can leverage that. And what we find is there's a virtuous cycle of, yeah, that is a good response. But what do you bit better if I added this? And then that becomes a slightly better response. And so over time, you sort of ratchet up the hill. I would say that the other thing that people talk about is not AI, but it's bots. And bots will use AI to have conversations. And as long as you identify it as a bot, bots can be super helpful. So like if I just want to know the park times at Walt Disney World, I don't really need to talk to an agent. I just need someone to tell me what the park times are. And I might have some queries about when will the fireworks be and which park is open later and that kind of stuff. And a bot can easily handle that. And as long as it's telling me that it's a bot, I'm totally fine with it. And it's super responsive and I can get to it quickly. My favorite example, and this will blow your mind, I think you'll like this. So on Xbox, there's a sort of a protocol when people call in, and people will call in on Xbox and they'll say they'll have a problem with the product. Like, disk isn't ejecting, or the controllers aren't connecting, or the screen is blank, that kind of stuff. And the agents were trained for many years to ask this simple question as the first question. And the simple question was, see if you can guess it actually, what do you think the agents were trained to ask as the first simple question?
Have you tried turning it off and back on again?
Very, very close, but it was actually the half of that. Have you turned it on?
Oh, okay. Wow.
Have you turned it on? Okay. And a percentage of the time people would say, oh, sorry. Okay. What percentage of the time do you think people would say, ooh, I should have turned it on? Guess.
Oh, good gracious. I would think probably higher than I would like to think. I don't know. Let's go and say 10%.
That's a pretty good guess. It's 30% of the time. Okay.
Wow.
30.
That's phenomenal.
Okay. Yes, I know. And it's one of those things where everybody is losing in that scenario because the agent is like a third of their day is spent telling people to turn their Xbox on. Okay. It's very unrewarding work. And for the customer, they've maybe waited, who knows how long. Sometimes it could be a long time, right? They may wait a half an hour to be told to turn the thing on. So you call in now, a bot immediately intercepts you, and he goes, before we connect you with an agent, could you please check to make sure your Xbox is on? Oh, geez, never mind. And then they hang up, and then the agent is happier because they're not getting these silly, ridiculous questions from people. And the customer's happier because they instantaneously get a helpful tip that helps them solve their problem and get gaming as quickly as they can. So that for me is an example where this stuff is just super helpful. I've actually yet to see any scenario where AI has taken any jobs away. All I'm seeing, especially in our field, is it making the agents happier, making them more productive, and getting more coverage. And ultimately, companies have got to get to a program where they're getting to 100% coverage. One of the only companies I've seen on the planet who's committed to 100% coverage is L'Oreal. So L'Oreal is saying we will respond to 100% of the comments made about us anywhere. They've got work to do to get there, obviously, but it's a beautiful, ambitious goal. And they're, increasing the number of seats that they have. They use Sprinkler for this, but increasing the number of seats they have. But they have thousands of seats, and their idea is to turn their whole company into a response mechanism to all the consumers that are out there. But in order to do that, they're going to have to use AI and lots of other tools because at some point they won't have enough employees to do everything the old-fashioned way. And so that's how all this stuff helps.
It's phenomenal, the scale that you can get to using this kind of method. So that's great. Just going back to the graph that you're showing as well at the moment on the screen about how the younger generations are turning towards messaging. I mean, if we have a look there, I think messaging is the one key factor that everybody is beginning to kind of hone in on. You've always got your mobile with you, haven't you? So it's a very easy mechanism by which to get in touch with the contact center and start the ball rolling. And from what you're saying then, your recommendation would be that not to artificially move or try to migrate an inquirer across from whichever channel they come in on. So if they come to you on messaging, you want to keep them on messaging to try to get their entire query resolved if you possibly can do without flipping them elsewhere. Is that how you're thinking about it?
That is exactly how I'm thinking about it. And if someone walks into your store, you don't tell them to go to the next store, right? If somebody walks into you, just like you don't force people into an interaction that's uncomfortable for them. If they've approached you a certain way, you should. You don't have to. I mean, you do whatever you want to do. You can go tell them to send a carrier pigeon. By the way, I actually once did a carrier pigeon campaign.
wow.
This is an aside, but I actually did this. I was trying to get senior executives to respond to a program, and so I sent carrier pigeons and said, if you want to see this presentation, put this note in their leg and then send it back to us. And 70% of the carrier pigeons were returned, and I can only assume the other 30% were like, I don't know. What do you think happened? I don't know. Dinner? I don't know what happened to them. But 70% came back. Anyway, but you could say that. I mean, you could say anything you want as an organization. I mean, there's no rule. But if you're really going to be customer centric, don't you want to do the thing the customer is, on the place that they're in? Like, don't you want to be where your customers are? And I would say that, when people sort of challenge me on this and say, well, we want to do it this way, or we want to do it that way, my response is always the same, which is that's completely your prerogative. You can do whatever you want. I think that's fine. You can do whatever you want. But be aware of the fact that somebody else, very likely a competitor, won't do that. And when they become more responsive to people in the places that the people are, people will prefer to work with them. I mean, this is a simple example, but I had a car dealership. I have a Ford Mustang, which is a great car, but it needs to go in for maintenance on a regular basis, potentially because of the way I drive it. It's a possibility. I'll entertain that. But this dealership would only call me if I brought it in for service. And take it in for service, and they're always finding new things. But they would only call me on the phone. And that's almost impossible for me to answer calls. I'm on something like this, or I'm in some sort of meeting all day long. Now, I can handle a text, and I can authorize things and stuff like that, but I can't just pick up the phone randomly. I'm in meetings. And so days would go by of me not being able to intercept these things and get the car done. And so I said to them, could you please text me? And they said, we don't have that capability. So I found a dealership that did, and I switched dealerships. And I mean, because the communication preference is becoming a part of the way people live their lives. And if you as a business don't want to honor that, again, that dealership that's their prerogative not to use text. But they missed out on thousands of dollars of service for my Mustang that they would have had otherwise because they were too stubborn to put texting in. I wasn't asking for anything super bizarre like carrier pigeons. I was saying texting, right? And so that to me is like always that those sort of examples to me are emblematic of, businesses have to make a Copernican shift in terms of how they look at the world. So who Copernicus was, right? He was, invented the idea or created the idea that the Earth is the center of the Earth is not the center of the universe. The sun was the center of the solar system. And so Copernicus's invention was he challenged the long-held belief that, the Earth was the center of the universe. And, observationally, if you stand in the field for a few days, I'd encourage you to try this sometime. You and I could do it together maybe sometime. It does appear that the Earth is the center, right? Like you stand in the field, it doesn't seem to be moving. It's flat, and then the sun comes up over there and goes down over there, and the sun comes up over there the next day and goes down over there the next day. Seems fine, right? Like that sort of seems like the sun's going around in a circle around a flat plate. But when you obviously try to do the calculations and try to understand the movement of the stars, and you try to calculate when Easter's going to occur and equinoxes and retrograde motion of Mars and all that kind of stuff, none of it makes sense in that heliocentric universe. And so basically Copernicus said, maybe the sun is the center of the universe and we're going around it. So that Copernican shift is, I think, the same thing that companies need to do, which is most people sit in this universe where their products and their world is the center of their universe. And that's all the way they think about it. And they think these are the channels I want to use, and this is the way I want to be. But, what if you think about it as your customer is the center of the universe, and you need to orbit around the customer's preferences and the customer's desires and the customer's needs? You operate in a very different way suddenly, and you stop thinking about what you like and start thinking about what your customers need. You can see that, CEOs and others, we did a survey with Forrester of more than 300 companies, and everyone is like 83% are saying this is a super high priority, but everyone is, we're not where we need to be. And so that's why I think the revolution is happening. And I would suggest that contact centers are the pointy end of the spear to sort of make this revolution in customer experience happen, because it's your customers who are calling contact centers. It's your best customers often because they care enough to call, and your highest priority prospects for the next sale are calling your contact centers. And too often people think about contact centers in this sort of separated version of the world. I mean, I would suggest that contact centers are your most important marketing tool. And so optimizing the performance of the contact center is the most important thing you can do as a business.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. I mean, a lot of people have been inquiring, and particularly with connection to this event, as they're all getting going now. We're coming out of the back of the pandemic. A lot of people have made perhaps rushed decisions in order to keep the contact centre going over this last year while we've had such extraordinary circumstances and people have been accessing from home, and perhaps they've moved some elements already up into the cloud and digital, but they're not sure that what they've picked is exactly right for them going forward in the long term. If they have to now get backing from top management to, change the way in which their contact center is functioning, what would your top recommendations be then in terms of what they need to be focusing on?
Well, I would say they should buy a sprinkler. Okay, I'll expand on that a little bit. A powerful presentation to top management, what I think would have three components in it. One would be, going back to my original comments sort of half an hour ago, I think you've got to update management on the fact that your customers are in new channels. And I would do a listening survey first to show management where mentions of your products are occurring across forums and blogs and all the social platforms and all the messaging platforms. That I think is very helpful because management generally will understand the concept of being where your customers are. The second thing is, I think you need to have a pretty frank discussion about where your talent is going to come from. The one thing that's kind of very interesting outcome of the pandemic is that it feels like people have disappeared. I don't know what happened, but it's like people are having a really hard time hiring. And I don't know if people dropped out or there's been this dislocation has caused a major labor shortage. So the competition for talent is going to be really high, particularly in contact centers. And there's always traditionally been a lot of turnover and it's been hard to find great people. So you're going to need to be an amazing experience for the agent. You want to have that agent in a seamless environment where it's easy to use. You want to be able to offer perks and benefits like being able to work from home, and you want to be able to help them do ultimately what I think all great contact center agents want, which is they want to be able to help customers. They want to be put in a situation where when someone calls and they're frustrated, they can resolve the issue. I think there's an innate human need to want to help other people. And particularly people go into this industry, they really like that. And if you can make that easier for them to do, they will love that job and they'll stay in that job. So number one, management needs to know that customers have changed where they are. Number two, they need to know we're in a massive talent competition and we need to over deliver there. And then number three, and this is where it's a little bit more strategic, is that I think you need to quantify the impact of customer experience on the revenue of the business. And make the linkage I made a few minutes ago, which is, customer experience there's many studies now showing that a 1 or 2 point improvement in customer experience can deliver hundreds of millions of dollars in value to the bottom line of a company. It's a really good study by Forrester on this, actually. So go to management and say, we want to take our customer experience score up by 3 points. And we believe that'll deliver a new bottom line total of $300 million. And our most strategic investment to do that is the contact center. To do that well in the contact center, we have to have great technology that makes agents love working there so that they can make customers happier on the channels on which they prefer to be on. I think that's a reasonably compelling argument. And it sort of goes, I used to work at Procter & Gamble, early part of my career, and you always make a recommendation based on, is it on strategy? That's your CX point. Is it proven? That talks to sort of like where the customers are, and then is it cost effective? And that talks to agent retention and talent competition.
Those are some really good tips for anyone who's looking to change things up over the next year. So thank you very much for that.
Well, Georgina, free tips. Look at that. The value people are getting.
So messaging is exploding, you were saying, and in short, it would seem actually, when I looked at this grid, the thing I was really struck by is that North America and Europe are catching up with Asia Pacific, who's already been messaging presumably for quite some time. They got into the habit of it now, but we're really seeing this taking off, aren't we?
Yeah, and I mean, and APAC has always been a bit ahead because they sort of skipped over some of the infrastructure that was built especially North America. But it's messaging is becoming a dominant form because it can be done asynchronously. And it was so funny because I've been saying asynchronous and synchronous communication for a really long time, and I know I'm like a sort of I think slightly nerdy and slightly geeky. My girlfriend would say very nerdy and incredibly geeky. But wherever we want to land on that spectrum, it's always been sort of like people kind of looked at me weirdly. What's been interesting with the pandemic is this concept of asynchronous communication has become part of the education lingo. And so my 9-year-old niece the other day said, "Oh yeah, I'm doing an async class tonight." And I said, "Really? Did you just say async?" And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "You meaning like you're not talking to the teacher live, you're just doing it on your own?" She goes, "Yeah." And they're calling it async all over the place. So I think that people are starting to kind of cotton on to this idea of there's two types of communication. One, I'm connected to you live like I am right now with you, or I'm having communication with you iteratively over potentially a very long period of time. And that move to iterative asynchronous communication is a very fundamental shift in the way that humans operate, and companies have to adjust to that.
Yeah, so looking at the next slide as well, just if you want to talk us through this one, customers are connected and impatient. Yeah,
so for me, one of the things that is challenging, I guess, is that we have a tendency to not take seriously some of this stuff, right? One of my favorite stats is that 95% of people will share a bad experience. And one thing I always try to tell people is remember that everyone's networked now. So when they're sharing a bad experience, maybe they shared a bad experience in the 1970s, they would do it over a backyard fence, right? And no big deal. When they share a bad experience now, they're sharing it on a massive global network that can reach everybody. So try not to deliver bad experiences anymore. People are reading reviews. They're looking at that. I mean, people read reviews for everything. Even when I'm buying paper towels, I read the reviews because I want to make sure that the quantity that they mention is the way it's been shipped. And sometimes people will say, they say it's 12, but they don't mean 12. They mean a gross. I've got a garage full of paper towels now. So it's you have to sort of be thoughtful about this. And I think the other stat, which I sort of always like to kind of just point people towards, is that 75% one in the top right-hand corner, which is, there's this idea. I think, again, companies are still like, hey, you got to come to me where I want you. But what's happening is customers are posting where they are. They're posting things on Twitter or they're posting things wherever. And they expect a reply to those posts within 5 minutes. How many companies are literally getting back to people within 5 minutes from a random post on Twitter? It's rare. It's not zero. There are definitely, we have customers who are doing this, but it is not the common motion. But that is the expectation. And there's a really good Harvard Business Review study showing that when you actually do that, you generate not only greater loyalty, but a higher willingness to pay more money for the product. Because people they want to work with companies that will respond to them and be responsive on the channels that they operate on, because that's a higher level of service and connection, and then that product's worth more in that context. In fact, even in the first hour, you're still going to get a bump, but after an hour, you're essentially you're getting back to people still important, but after an hour, you've lost that edge of, we pay more for this product because they're so responsive.
That's incredibly high expectations, isn't it? And something really for us all to be aware of. Well, it's certainly higher than traditionally when we've all been maybe used to hanging on the phone forever to try to get through. I mean, it's great that people really want that. If you
walked into Harrods and you went to the just stay with me for a second. You walked into Harrods and you went to what would you tend to buy at Harrods? I mean, what would you, or Selfridges? Let's go to Selfridges. You walk to Selfridges and you go to the watch counter, okay? How long do you think it would be appropriate for you to stand at the watch counter waiting?
Yeah, I get your point.
How would you react if you had to stand at the watch counter for 5 minutes before a salesperson came and helped you? It would be weird, right? And that's all it is. And that the fact that people do think that this is like, oh boy, people have a lot of expectations. No, they don't. They just we've trained people to walk into a store and be served immediately. So why can't they be served anywhere else immediately? That's just the expectation. And the other thing is, remember that expectations are set in other industries, right? So when you use Uber, right? Uber, how long do you expect to wait for an Uber? Well, how long they tell you. Right? They say, it'll be here in 3 minutes, or it'll be here in 7 minutes, or it'll be here in 10 minutes, or whatever it is. And you're like, I'm totally cool with that because I know how long it's going to take. And they show you exactly where your little car is and as it's coming along. Well, that now is the new standard for all industries. Not you don't think of it as just ride hailing. You think of it as like, well, that's how I want to know where my pizza is, and that's why I want to know where my hair dryer is, and that's where I want to know where my jewelry is. Like, why can't everyone tell me how long it's going to be, and why isn't everyone getting back to me right away? So we have radically revised consumer expectations in enough categories now that those are now the expectations everywhere.
Fantastic. We are very nearly out of time. However, there is a question that's I'd like you to try to address if you can before we go. So see how swiftly we can do this.
I hope it's a really tough one.
Well, it says you haven't mentioned CRM. Where does CRM continue to fit in the approach to supporting our agents to help customers?
Right. So this is a super interesting question. It's a great question, by the way. And the answer is 42.
The answer is 42.
No, you don't get that?
I get that, yeah.
Right. Do you get that? Okay, all right. Well, maybe we can be friends. Okay, so the actual answer. So there's actually two systems that people need these days. So there's the traditional CRM system, which contains the transactional data from your customers, and it's a relational database. There are many excellent CRM systems out there, like Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, NetSuite, a whole bunch of them out there. That doesn't go away. CRM, has to be there. But what we're finding is that the really interesting data is the experience data. These are the things that people are saying about you online. And they're saying it, remember, in lots of different ways. They're using emojis, they're using memes, they're using pictures, they're using videos. It's not stuff that neatly fits into a relational database in a CRM system. So what companies are doing is they're building a CXM database, customer experience management database, CXM database. It's CXM plus CRM. That is the sort of the new CDP. Some people are calling it CXDP, but there's this sort of new CDP, which takes the transactional data and the experience data, puts it as a single 360-degree profile. And now as an agent, I can not only know what you purchased, but I can also know what you said about the company, or what reactions you had, or what things you did on the website, and all that kind of stuff. It's that combination of experience and transactions. It's critical, and that's an excellent question.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much. It's a great answer as well in a fairly swift amount of time that we have left. But much appreciated, Grad. And thank you, the audience. I hope that you found Grad's tips useful. And it is interesting to hear about all the changes that we're all dealing with in the contact center. There's so many different factors which are making everybody move towards digital and towards all these different types and ways in which they can get in touch. So definitely something that we all have to be paying a lot more attention to moving forwards. But that's fantastic. Thank you so much for all of the slides that you put together as well, Grad. Much appreciated.
And that's a wrap. CX Network Contact Centers 2021. I want to thank Georgina Wilczek. She was an amazing host, an amazing interviewer. We had a lot of fun together. And I also say the prep times and the prep before the session was great as well. It was really easy to work with, and it just was a joy from beginning to end. And that is all for today. So for the Unified CXM Experience, I am Grad Conn, CXO, or Chief Experience Officer at Sprinklr, New York Stock Exchange listed company, ticker symbol CXM. And I will see you next time.